Hey, welcome to Week 8, Bible Studies for Life. Today we're going from John that we've been in. Last week we were in Matthew for Easter Sunday. I hope you had a great Easter Sunday, by the way, and celebrate the resurrection. What a wonderful time that was. I hope for you, your church, and your family. And today we start with the next section of material in Bible Studies for Life. We're going to be in Matthew 24 and then 25, but really in depth in 24 for several weeks, looking at the return of Christ, the end time, second coming, all of these kinds of things. And so we're going to dive deep into that over the next several weeks, and I hope you enjoy that. It's a great chapter, a lot of things that I'm just going to tell you right off I don't know the answer to. Okay, if you're watching the video hoping that Steve's going to answer all your questions, well, I hate to disappoint you, but it's just not going to happen. We're going to end up with a lot more questions maybe than we have answers. But the point of all of this is, I think, as we read it, as we try to understand it, is this realization that, first of all, God is in control. In spite of how it may appear, God is in control. He is sovereign over the events. And secondly, that in the end, God wins. He doesn't lose this ultimate spiritual warfare that takes place. God wins that battle. And that thirdly, maybe to say you don't have to worry about getting it all right or getting it all wrong. You just need to be ready for however it's going to turn out, to be faithful to Christ. Those are the things that really matter. Okay? So before we dive into this passage, be sure and like, subscribe, share with others. If you want to share this on Facebook or YouTube or however you want to share, comment on it. Let me know what you're learning. If you have questions that come up as we're going through it and things you want to ask those. I'm happy to respond to any of those as we go through this study. Okay, let's look here. Matthew 24, first few verses. As Jesus left and was going out of the temple, his disciples came up and called his attention to its buildings. He replied to them, "Do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." Okay, this is in a section of time here that comes after Jesus has come. It's the last week of his life. Okay, so there's a lot of events, and Matthew really spends several chapters on these events that happen from the time that Jesus comes in and cleanses the temple and to all the other things that happen. Matthew's there talking about all of these things, or showing Jesus talking about them. Okay, and so these events are happening that last week, and he says that they're in the temple, and when they leave, the disciples come up and they say, "Look at the buildings, look at the temple." Now, the temple is a majestic structure. It's a magnificent place. It's beautiful. It's huge. It's impressive, and they're impressed by it, and they're, I'm sure, saying things to Jesus about, "Boy, look at this building. Isn't it great?" And Jesus really checks them, okay, and he uses this as a jumping off place to talk to them about some things that are going to happen. And he says, "Do you see all these things? You see these buildings?" He says, "I truly, verily, verily, I say to you," right? "Not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." He tells them, look, the temple's going to be destroyed. As big as you think this building is, as wonderful, as magnificent, as a great edifice it is, and as important it is in the Jewish life and worship, this building will be torn down, completely leveled. Well, that's not what they expected, right? It's not the conversation they thought they were going to be having at that time. So Jesus is now taking them into a conversation that's very different than what they thought would happen. The Lord does that a lot with us, doesn't he? We think we know what's going to happen, and then he turns. It says, "While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, 'Tell us, when will these things happen, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?'" Okay. So you get this picture, right? As they leave, they say these things about this building, and Jesus tells them, look, this building's going to get torn down. And there's silence. They don't say anything about it. Now they're on the Mount of Olives, so they're up where they can look over the city, kind of it. And they finally come up to him, and they're like, okay, tell us about this, right? When is this going to happen? When is it going to be torn down? And what's the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, here's one thing I noticed. What is the sign of your coming? Okay, we know the disciples don't get it all, right? But they have heard Jesus talk about leaving and coming back. They've heard that conversation. They've heard these things he said. And so they have an idea that he's going to come again. Now, I don't think they process in their minds that the only way he can come again is if he leaves. But they have an idea that he's coming again. They're asking, what is the sign of your coming, of the end of the age? Jesus tells them, well, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. And I tell you, this word deceive is one of the key words in this passage we're looking at today. In this idea that people get deceived, that people fall into religious leaders who claim to be something that they're not, who make claims theologically that they can't uphold, who make claims personally that are not true, that they can't fulfill, who make statements about the future that don't come true. There are a lot of people that deceive constantly, and he says there are going to be a lot of people that are going to come saying, I am. So he says there are a lot of people that are going to claim to be me, that aren't me. Uh-oh, we've got a wasp flying around in here. We're going to have to take care of that. It's kind of weird, isn't it, to think that people can claim to be the Messiah, can claim to be Jesus who's returned, and that people would actually believe that, and especially because of all the things that Jesus says have to happen and will happen when he returns. And yet, clearly here he's saying there are going to be people that are going to be deceived. They're going to fall into the spell of charismatic leaders who tell them things that sound right, that sound good, that they want to grab hold of. And he says, be careful about this. And then he says, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginning of labor pains. Okay, so this idea that there's going to be lots of wars, that there's going to be turmoil in the world, fighting that takes place, earthquakes, natural disasters happening. And I hear oftentimes people will say, well, I think we're seeing more of that. We must be getting close. But Jesus seems to me to be saying here that these things are going to happen, right? But this isn't the end. This is the beginning of the labor pains. The labor pains are the indication that the end will come, right? The labor pains are not the end. The labor pains are the beginning, the indications. This is going to happen. He says it's going to happen. Don't be alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. Not yet. It's not yet. So don't conflate those things to think that now the end is here, okay? And then they will hand you over to be persecuted, and they will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. Okay, he says, then this is going to happen. He's not painting a very rosy picture here, is he? It's not really something that's enticing to people. Oh, well, that's exciting to find out about. I mean, this is hard. This is a hard world, he says, and it's going to be worse. And he's talking to them about, then you will be handed over to be persecuted, and they will kill you. Wow. And you will be hated by all nations because of my name. The things that Jesus says to his disciples are true for his disciples, but they're also true for us. And I want you to understand that there is a sense of, in prophecy, this already, not yet. There are some things that have happened already as we look back on this, but there's still a not yet. That there's almost this two phase or two ideas of fulfillment, the near phase and then the distant phase. And so we might look back at this verse where he talks about, the temple being destroyed. Well, in 70 AD, the Romans came through and destroyed the temple. This happened in 70 AD, and yet it seems that he's talking about something bigger, right? Something greater, something worse, something in higher degree, because we know the disciples are persecuted and many of them die for their faith. They are martyred, right? And many other followers of Christ in the 3rd, 4th century are martyred. They lose their lives. Stephen in the 1st century loses his life following Christ, right? So we see this, and you could say, well, that's already been fulfilled, and yet there is a not yet to it, that it will get worse even for those of us now, right? Then many will fall away. So there's going to be not only this persecution and this hatred of believers, but then there will be a scattering of believers, of those who fall away, of those who were apart but never were apart. Those who seemed to be with us but were not. They fell away. They did not persevere to the end. It's why so many times in Paul's letters he writes about persevering, enduring to the end. Jesus talks about enduring to the end, going all the way. He says a lot of people fall away. They betray one another. They hate one another. You see people that will, in the midst of persecution, will not stand for their faith, but will bow and will turn on others and turn them in, right? And false prophets will rise up, and again, here's that word again, deceive many. That people will fall into the spell of those who are false prophets, false leaders, spiritual people, it appears, but who are actually taking you away from the cross and not towards the cross. This picture that Jesus paints, this is terrible, right? Now, listen, I think it's hard to read this and say, well, the church won't be here during this, because it appears that he's talking about the church being here and going through this. And he says, because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, there's your word, endures to the end, will be saved. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Lawlessness multiplies, and the love of many grows cold. As lawlessness grows, those who are following Christ begin to pull back, and their love for the Lord, their love for one another grows cold. But the one who endures will be saved. Here is the promise that Christ gives. Endure, you will be saved. This good news, the gospel will be preached to all nations, right? In all the world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. The Lord's desire is that none should perish, but that all should come to salvation. He is pushing the gospel through us to the world. He desires to see everyone have an opportunity to hear the gospel. And the end will come. Then the end will come. I want you to see this phrase, this last phrase, the end will come, not as a resignation of the Lord, but as a proclamation of victory. Because he's the one who brings it to an end. He's the one who concludes it. He is sovereign. And all of these things, we go back here and we see this, wars and rumors of wars and all this, and we think the world's in chaos. But I want you to understand, the world's not in chaos. The Lord is in control through this whole thing. He's sovereign over all of it. And so we've got to trust in him. Endure to the end. Be faithful to the end. Encourage one another to endure. Because the Lord's going to win. In the end, he's going to win. And those who are with him win because of it. All right, here's a couple of other questions that you may want to ask in your class. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you subscribe to our channel, like, comment. Let me know what questions you've got that this brings up. And a lot of those questions actually get answered in the next several weeks as we go through the rest of this chapter. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.